You know what 20 years of your life looks like? It looks like a spider web of copper wire, 20,800 gallons of dielectric oil, and a constant low-frequency hum that vibrates in your bones even when you're sleeping at home. I can feel that 60 hertz rhythm in my chest right now, sitting here telling you this story. I'm Brian Thompson, 48 years old, and I've been the electrical systems engineer for Great Lakes Metals in Ohio for 2 decades. This place eats electricity like a starving dog tears through a steak. We're talking 40 megawatts on a good day, enough power to light up a small city. I'm the guy who keeps those electrons flowing where they need to go. Been married to Linda for 22 years, got a mortgage on a little ranch house in Akron, and 2 kids who think dad's job is something with electricity. My son Danny's at Ohio State studying business, ironic considering what happened, and my daughter Sarah just started nursing school. Between college tuition and the mortgage, I can't afford to screw around with my career. This job isn't just a paycheck, it's everything. The factory isn't just a building to me, it's a living, breathing beast that needs exactly 13.8 kilovolts or it throws a tantrum that costs 6 figures per minute. I know its moods better than I know my wife's, and after 22 years of marriage, that's saying something. I know switchgear B gets sticky when humidity drops below 40%. I know the backup generator takes exactly 8 minutes to synchronize with the main grid without manual override because the phase converters drift. I know that Transformer 3 has a harmonic signature that sounds like a sick whale when the load exceeds 85%. This knowledge didn't come from textbooks. It came from being here at 3 a.m. when ice storms knocked out half the county. From crawling through cable runs with a flashlight between my teeth, tracing shorts that would fry a lesser man. From spending Christmas morning 2019 nursing a blown capacitor bank back to life because 450 people needed their paychecks that week. The guys on the floor respect that. Anthony Tony Rodriguez, who's been running the primary smelter for 15 years, big guy with forearms like tree trunks and a laugh you can hear over the machinery. He doesn't call maintenance when something sounds wrong. He calls me. Daniel Dan Murphy, 2 years from retirement, hands like leather and a sixth sense for failing bearings. He knows that if Brian's walking around with his coffee mug, everything's running smooth. If Brian's running, you better find some concrete and start praying to whatever God you've been ignoring. Then there's Ryan Walker. Ryan's 30 years old, wears suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and has a smile that looks like it was programmed by a marketing algorithm. He's the founder's son, took over operations 6 months ago when his old man decided his ticker couldn't handle the stress anymore. Old Walker moved to some golf resort in Arizona where the biggest electrical concern is whether the cart batteries are charged. Ryan doesn't know voltage from voltage drop. I'm not being mean here, it's just fact. Guy thinks efficiency is something you download from the cloud. He walks around the plant with this glossy tablet, frowning at equipment he doesn't understand, which is basically everything that isn't a coffee machine or copy printer. I saw trouble coming about 2 months into his reign. Started bringing in consultants. You know the type. Mid-20s kids with MBA degrees who look at a blast furnace and ask if we can optimize the thermal output by implementing lean methodologies. I watched them circle my department like sharks who'd read about blood in a business school textbook but never actually seen the real thing. The writing was on the wall, and by wall, I mean the grease-stained drywall of my control room where I'd taped up 20 years worth of emergency contact numbers, shift schedules, and that picture Danny drew in 2nd grade of me fixing the big machines. That wall told the story of a guy who'd built his life around keeping other people's lights on. My control room is my domain. Kept at a crisp 62 degrees to keep the servers happy, smells like ozone and burnt copper. It's not cologne-friendly territory. The walls are lined with monitors showing real-time data from every corner of the plant. Voltage curves dancing across screens like electronic heartbeats. Temperature readouts from the smelter pots that run at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt copper pennies like ice cubes. I've got backup systems for my backup systems, and contingency plans for scenarios most people never dream about. What happens when a squirrel commits suicide on the primary transformer? I know. What do you do when the utility company's frequency drifts and threatens to throw our phase synchronization off by 3 degrees? I've handled it. What's the procedure when ice buildup causes flashovers on the 138 kV lines? Been there, done that, still got the scorch marks on my hard hat. But Ryan and his consultant buddies didn't see any of that. They saw spreadsheet line items. They saw a department that looked heavy on paper. They saw overhead that could be optimized with automation and remote monitoring solutions. The The atmosphere started shifting around week 8 of Ryan's management adventure. Conversations got quieter when I walked past. People stopped making eye contact in the hallways. There's a specific silence that falls over a factory when layoffs are looming. It's heavier than the machinery noise, thicker than the summer heat that builds up in the casting area. My guys felt it too. Tony started asking more questions about procedures he'd known by heart for years. Dan kept double-checking readings that had been stable for months. Chris Wilson, young guy with 3 kids and a mortgage bigger than mine, started staying late even when his shift was over. Like maybe if management saw him working harder, they'd leave him alone. I kept doing my job, kept the beast fed, kept my coffee mug full. But I also started making some preparations. Not sabotage, I'm not that kind of guy. Just cleaning house. You know how you accumulate stuff over 20 years? Personal notes, shortcut files, little cheat sheets that make your job easier? I had text files scattered across my computer with titles like Transformer 3 quirks and weekend startup procedures. Tiny, crucial details that lived in my fingertips, not in any official manual. Things like feeder 7 runs hot, ignore alarm until 95C, then check cooling pump. Or main breaker handle sticks left, jiggle twice or it won't engage properly. These weren't company secrets, they were survival guides. The knowledge that separates a guy who reads manuals from a guy who actually keeps the place running. But if Ryan and his efficiency experts thought I was heavy, maybe I needed to shed some weight. So I started deleting them, one by one. If they wanted automation and cloud-based solutions, they could figure out for themselves why the system hiccuped every Tuesday at 9:15 a.m. when the city grid switched substations. Yesterday morning, the summons came. Calendar invite titled Operational Restructuring Discussion. No agenda attached. Just Ryan, me, and Jennifer Coleman from HR, a woman who always looks like she's smelling something mildly unpleasant. I've seen that look before. It's the corporate equivalent of a funeral director's smile. I put on my cleanest work shirt, the blue flannel Linda ironed for me Sunday night, and walked through the factory floor on my way to the admin building. Wanted to feel the vibration in the deck plates one more time, hear the rhythm of the stamping presses. I touched the cold steel of a support beam as I passed, a goodbye pat, though I didn't know it yet. The guys nodded as I walked by. Tony was adjusting the lance position on Smelter 4, sweat beading on his forehead despite the ventilation fans running full blast. "Morning, Brian. How's she running today?" "Running hot, Tony," I said, which was our standard exchange. "Keep an eye on those thermal readings." Dan was hunched over a bearing assembly, using a stethoscope to listen for irregularities in the rotation. At 63, his hearing wasn't what it used to be, but his hands could still feel problems through metal and grease that younger guys would miss completely. "Bearing sounds good, Brian. No scoring in the races." Chris Wilson was training a new kid on proper lockout procedures. Safety first, production second. That was the rule I drilled into everyone. "Make sure that breaker's tagged out before you even think about opening that panel," Chris was saying. 460 volts will stop your heart faster than your ex-wife's lawyer. These weren't just co-workers. They were my crew, my responsibility. If something went wrong on my watch, these guys paid the price in blood, burns, or worse. That weight sits on your shoulders differently when you've got 20 years of keeping people safe under your belt. I walked into the conference room expecting a private conversation. Instead, Ryan had turned it into a spectator sport. Around the mahogany table sat department heads, sales managers, logistics coordinators, and 3 fresh-faced efficiency consultants with tablets and that eager look of people about to witness an execution. "Brian, take a seat," Ryan said, gesturing to the chair at the far end of the table. He was positioned at the head, naturally, next to a projector displaying a graph with a red line diving like a stone toward bedrock. The slide title read, "Legacy Costs and Operational Inefficiency." "I'll stand," I said. My knees lock up in cheap conference room chairs. Old Navy injury. That wasn't entirely true. My knees were fine, but I wanted the psychological advantage of standing while they sat. Plus, exit strategy. Harder to pin down a moving target. Ryan's practiced smile flickered just a bit. He clicked his laptop and the slide changed to a detailed breakdown of my department's costs. My salary, my benefits, overtime expenses, training budget, equipment maintenance, all projected in high definition for everyone to analyze like a medical examiner's report. "As you can see," Ryan began, addressing the room instead of speaking to me directly, The Electrical Oversight Department represents a significant drain on operational efficiency. We're paying premium rates for manual intervention in an era of comprehensive automation. He gestured to one of the consultants, a kid who looked like he'd graduated last week with a degree in industrial optimization or some such nonsense. Our analysis indicates that current grid management functions can be seamlessly integrated into our existing SCADA software platform with minimal oversight requirements. The consultant nodded enthusiastically. The cloud-based monitoring solution provides real-time analytics with automated response protocols. Manual intervention becomes largely redundant. I almost laughed. Redundant. 20 years of keeping this place from burning down, and I was redundant. Brian, Ryan continued, effective immediately. Your position is being eliminated. We're implementing a comprehensive digital transformation of our electrical systems management. Cloud-based monitoring. Digital transformation. These people talked like they were selling smartphones, not trying to manage industrial equipment that predated their college careers. You're going to run a 40-year-old metals plant from the cloud, I said. Not a question. A statement. What happens when your internet connection hiccups, Ryan? What happens when latency hits 400 milliseconds and your phase synchronization drifts by 5 degrees? That's precisely why we have redundancy protocols, another consultant piped up. Squeaky voice, tie too wide for his narrow shoulders. The algorithmic response system compensates for network variations automatically. This time I did laugh. Wasn't a pleasant sound. Came from that part of your throat where years of industrial dust and cigarette smoke used to live. The algorithm, Junior? Your algorithm doesn't know that smelter number 6 has a hairline crack in the primary induction coil that creates harmonic feedback loops every time the ambient temperature drops below 50 degrees. I stepped closer to the table. The logistics manager actually leaned back in his chair. Your algorithm doesn't know that we have to ramp up voltage gradually on Monday mornings because the utility company switches grid configurations at 6 a.m. and causes transient spikes that can trip our protective relays. Your cloud-based solution doesn't understand that the backup generator's automatic transfer switch has a 2-second delay that requires manual load balancing or we lose synchronization entirely. That's exactly the kind of anecdotal folklore we're looking to eliminate, Ryan cut in, his voice getting sharper. We operate on data-driven decisions, Brian, not tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge. Folklore. I'd kept this place from catastrophic failure dozens of times, and they called it folklore. I've prevented 4 major electrical failures in the last 18 months, I said, voice steady and low. Each one would have cost more than my entire annual salary. You call it folklore, I call it physics. Fire me, you lose the translator. These machines don't speak English, Ryan, they speak voltage and amperage. And right now they're telling me you're about to make a very expensive mistake. Enough. Ryan slammed his hand on the table, theatrical gesture that probably looked good in whatever leadership seminar he'd attended. This isn't a negotiation, it's a notification. You're terminated. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. He slid a packet of papers across the polished wood. Standard severance package, 2 weeks' pay for every year of service, provided I signed the non-disclosure agreement and promised not to disparage the company publicly. I looked at those papers. Then I looked at Ryan. I felt that cold clarity you get when electrical equipment fails. Immediate damage assessment, rapid calculation of repair options. Only this time, I wasn't going to repair anything. You know what your problem is, Ryan? I asked, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You think I'm expensive. But I'm the cheapest insurance policy this company ever bought. You're trading a firefighter for a smoke detector with dead batteries. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my security badge. Worn smooth from 20 years of daily use, lanyard stained with grease and coffee. I placed it gently on the conference table. I'll clear out my office, I said. But let me give you some free consulting advice since you love consultants so much. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the back of the empty chair. The smelters run on a buffered power supply system. That buffer gets manually calibrated every 3 hours to compensate for utility grid frequency drift. I performed the last calibration at 7:30 this morning. It's now 10:45 a.m. Ryan was already rolling his eyes, but I continued anyway. In exactly 25 minutes, that frequency drift will exceed the safety threshold parameters. Your automated system will attempt to correct the variance, but it can't compensate because the sensors on pot line 2 are fouled with carbon particulate buildup. I was planning to clean those sensors after lunch. We have maintenance crews, Ryan said dismissively. Your maintenance crews fix broken pumps and replace worn belts, I replied. They don't touch the programmable logic controllers because they're appropriately terrified of 480-volt switchgear. You have 25 minutes, Ryan. If that drift isn't manually corrected, the safety interlocks will trip automatically. Power to the smelting pots will be interrupted. I straightened up, adjusted my collar. 8 minutes after the power cuts, the molten aluminum in those 75 pots will begin to solidify. Once that metal hardens, you're looking at $200,000 per pot to dismantle and rebuild. That's $15 million in equipment damage alone. Add in lost production time, missed delivery contracts, and regulatory penalties for the environmental discharge, and you're approaching $45 million in total impact. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the consultants had stopped typing. But hey, I said, walking toward the door, I'm sure your cloud-based solution will handle it just fine. I didn't look back as I left, but as I stepped into the hallway, I heard Ryan muttering something to the consultants about scare tactics and resistance to change. 25 minutes. The clock was already ticking. The walk from the admin building to my truck usually takes 3 minutes. I took 8, wanting to soak in the rhythm of the place one last time. The thrum, thrum, thrum of the stamping presses in Building C, the sharp hiss of steam release valves, the underlying electrical hum that most people can't even hear. But that's been the soundtrack to my adult life. 20 years of conducting this industrial symphony, and now I was dropping the baton. But I had one stop to make first. My truck was parked near the auxiliary control shed, a small brick building that most people mistake for a utility closet. Inside it houses the manual overrides for our substation, the physical breakers that connect our entire facility to the municipal power grid. It's the heart of the beast, and I still had the keys. Ryan, in his rush to humiliate me publicly, had forgotten that physical access trumps digital permissions every time. My brass key ring included everything: main building, equipment sheds, emergency shutoffs, 20 years of trust, and he'd revoked my computer access but left me holding the literal keys to the kingdom. I unlocked the heavy steel door and stepped inside. The auxiliary shed was cool and dark, illuminated only by the green and red status lights on the breaker panel. The electrical hum was louder here, a physical pressure against your eardrums that told you this was where serious power lived. This wasn't the friendly 120 volts in your kitchen outlet. This was the raw 138,000 volt feed from the utility company stepped down to our working voltage of 13.8 kilovolts. On the main panel was a switch labeled SW4 Auto Sync Override. This was the heart of Ryan's automation fantasy. The software system continuously tries to synchronize our internal electrical frequency with the city's power grid. Problem is, the city grid is dirty. It fluctuates, surges, dips. When our monitoring software detects too much variance, it assumes something catastrophic is happening and automatically shuts down all non-essential systems to protect the equipment. For 20 years, I'd kept that switch in the manual position. Manual override tells the computer, relax, I'm watching this personally. Ignore the normal fluctuations. It allows our system to stay synchronized with the grid even when the power quality isn't perfect, which in Ohio's aging electrical infrastructure is basically always. But if I flipped SW4 from manual to auto, the computer would take full control. And without the custom software patches I'd so carefully deleted from my workstation, the monitoring system would see the normal grid variations, interpret them as dangerous faults, and automatically trip our main breakers to protect the facility. The irony was beautiful. Ryan wanted automation and cloud-based solutions. I was about to give him exactly what he'd asked for. I reached out and touched the switch. My hand was steady. 20 years of handling high-voltage emergencies had taught me to stay calm under pressure. This was just another electrical problem that needed solving, except this time, I was creating the problem instead of fixing it. You want full automation, Ryan? I whispered to the humming machinery. Congratulations. You got it. Click. I flipped the switch from manual to auto. The status light flickered once, then turned solid red. The hum in the room didn't change, the lights didn't dim. To an untrained observer, absolutely nothing had happened. But I just removed the safety net, activated a time bomb that would detonate in approximately 18 minutes when the next monitoring cycle completed. I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and walked to my truck. 15-year-old Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles, rust spots on the wheel wells, and a bumper sticker that read, "I am the warranty." I climbed in, started the engine, and began driving away from the only job I'd known since I was 28 years old. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw Kevin Parks, head of security, doing his rounds in a golf cart. Kevin was good people. Brought donuts on Fridays, remembered everyone's kids' names, never power-tripped with his badge. He waved at me, probably assuming I was heading to lunch. "Leaving early today, Brian?" he called out, slowing his cart. "Yeah, Kev," I replied, engine idling, taking some time off. "Ryan's orders." Kevin frowned, confused. He'd been here 12 years, knew the rhythms of the place. Time off? What about the afternoon calibration checks? "Not my problem anymore," I said, putting the truck in drive. "Hey, Kevin, do me a favor, stay out of Building C for the next hour. Take your rounds outside." "Why? What's wrong with Building C?" "Nothing yet, just trust me on this one." I drove away, watching Great Lakes Metals shrink in my rearview mirror. The facility looked peaceful from a distance, white steam rising from cooling stacks, the American flag snapping in the breeze above the main entrance. You'd never guess that in about 15 minutes, all hell was going to break loose. I didn't go home. Home was quiet, and when it's quiet, I think too much. Instead, I drove to Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar 4 miles up Route 21 that smells like cigarettes and regret. It was 11:20 a.m. on a Tuesday, so the only customers were me, a guy who looked like he'd been living in his car since the Bush administration, and Michelle O'Brien, the bartender with hair that defied both gravity and common sense. "Little early for the hard stuff, isn't it, Brian?" Michelle asked, wiping down a glass that would never truly be clean. "Celebrating," I said, sliding onto a stool. "Career transition, immediate and involuntary." Michelle raised an eyebrow but poured a shot of Jim Beam without being asked. I'd been coming here after particularly rough shifts for 8 years. She knew my drink, knew I wasn't much for conversation, knew that sometimes a man needed whiskey at noon and it wasn't her place to judge. I placed my cell phone on the bar, screen down, but even face down I could feel it beginning to vibrate. Bzzt, bzzt, like an angry insect trapped under a glass. My dashboard clock read 11:35 a.m. Right about now, the monitoring software would be completing its analysis cycle. The automated systems would be detecting the natural frequency variations in the municipal grid. Without my override patches, the computer would be interpreting normal power fluctuations as dangerous anomalies. On the factory floor, the guys would be starting to notice subtle changes. The steady hum of the main motors would be developing a slight, irregular warble. The fluorescent lights in the break room would begin an almost imperceptible flicker. Nothing dramatic yet, but to experienced industrial workers, these were early warning signs that something was going wrong with the electrical systems. Tony would be the first to notice. 15 years of working around high-voltage equipment gives you a sixth sense about power quality. He'd probably check the voltage readings on his station, see numbers that looked slightly off, maybe call over to Dan for a second opinion. Dan, with his 30 years of troubleshooting experience, would recognize the symptoms immediately. Frequency drift. Phase imbalance. The kind of electrical instability that made old-timers nervous because they'd seen what happened when it went uncorrected. Both of them would be looking for me right about now. My phone was vibrating more frequently. I flipped it over to check the screen. 3 missed calls from Ashley Martinez, my assistant engineer, 2 from the main plant number, 1 from Ryan himself. The text messages were starting to pile up. "Brian, where are you? Seeing some weird fluctuations on the main bus. Voltage monitors showing yellow warnings. Should I call you? Brian, we need you. Something's wrong with the grid synchronization." I ordered another whiskey and turned the phone back over. The crisis was just getting started. 12 o'clock hit like a sledgehammer. On the TV mounted in Murphy's Corner, the local news cut to breaking coverage. Industrial emergency at Great Lakes Metals plant. The helicopter footage showed black smoke billowing from our main stack. Emergency venting from the smelting operations. When those pots lose power and start to cool, they release toxic gases that look like smoke. The EPA doesn't appreciate that kind of thing. My phone had stopped ringing for exactly 4 minutes, which was the most terrifying silence of all. That meant they'd stopped panicking and started strategizing, probably going over Ryan's head straight to the top of the corporate food chain. At 12:15 p.m., a black Lincoln Continental screeched into Murphy's gravel parking lot, sending dust clouds across the lot like something out of an action movie. This wasn't Ryan. Ryan drove a Tesla Model S because he thought it gave him environmental credibility. This was old-school Detroit steel, the kind of car that important people rode in when the world was ending. The door flew open and Scott Anderson stumbled out, chairman of the board, 62 years old Walker's right-hand man since before I'd started working there. Scott looked like he'd been dragged out of a bunker during an air raid. Rumpled golf shirt, khakis wrinkled, hair sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it. He burst through Murphy's front door, letting in a blast of October sunlight that temporarily blinded everyone inside. His eyes swept the room, found me sitting calmly at the bar with a whiskey in front of me, and he practically jogged over. "Brian," he gasped, completely out of breath. "Thank God. You have to come back. Right now." I didn't turn around on my stool, kept watching the news coverage on the fuzzy TV screen. The reporter was interviewing our fire chief now, asking about potential evacuation procedures for the surrounding neighborhoods. "Get in line, Scott," I said, taking a slow sip of Jim Beam. "I'm enjoying my early retirement." "The potline temperature is down to 1,650 degrees, Scott said, panic making his voice crack. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before the aluminum hardens past the point of salvage. 15 minutes, Brian." "Sounds like a management problem to me," I replied without emotion. "Ryan assured me your cloud-based automation system could handle everything. Maybe try turning it off and back on again." Scott actually grabbed my shoulder, tried to spin me around to face him. I didn't budge. "Ryan's a complete moron," Scott shouted loud enough that Michelle stopped pretending to clean glasses and the drunk guy in the corner actually woke up. "We fired him. Well, suspended him, pending a full investigation into this disaster. Whatever you want, Brian. Name your price. Just get in that car." "You fired him?" I raised an eyebrow, finally turning to look at Scott. His face was flushed red, sweat stains spreading under his arms despite the cool October air. "Funny thing, Scott. Who do you think signed off on those budget cuts? Who approved the operational efficiency review that targeted my department?" Scott's face went pale as he realized where this was headed. "Don't pretend this is all Ryan," I continued. "You bought the gun. He just pulled the trigger." "Brian, please," Scott begged, and I'd never seen a corporate executive actually beg before. "We're talking about the entire company. 450 people work here. If those smelting pots freeze solid, we're done. Bankruptcy. Everyone goes home with nothing. No pensions, no severance, no health care, and there it was. The button he knew would work. I didn't give a damn about the shareholders or Scott's stock options or Ryan's inheritance. But Tony Rodriguez with 3 kids in school, Dan Murphy 2 years away from retirement with a pension he'd earned, Chris Wilson trying to pay off his mortgage, those guys deserve better than corporate incompetence. "I want a contract," I said, standing up from the bar stool for the first time since I'd arrived. "Independent contractor, $180 per hour, minimum 40 hours per week, 5-year guarantee, no termination without cause. Full operational autonomy over all electrical systems. No consultants, no efficiency experts, no MBA graduates telling me how to do my job." "Done," Scott said immediately. "I'll write it on a bar napkin if I have to. Electronic signature sent to my personal email. Right now, while I finish my drink." Scott fumbled for his iPhone with shaking hands, speed dialing the company's legal department. "Emergency contract. Send it immediately. I don't care if you have to wake up the lawyers. Just do it." 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it, scanned the terms. Sloppy legalese, but the key points were there. 180-hour, guaranteed authority, no interference. "One more thing," I said, draining the last of my whiskey. "I want Ryan to personally escort me from the front gate to the control room, and I want him to apologize, publicly, in front of the entire crew." Scott looked like I'd just asked him to sacrifice his firstborn, but he nodded. "Fine. Whatever it takes. Can we please just go?" The ride back to Great Lakes Metals was the fastest 5 minutes of my life. Scott drove like a maniac, running red lights, taking corners on 2 wheels. When we pulled up to the main gate, it looked like a disaster zone. Fire trucks, ambulances, environmental response teams, and a crowd of our workers standing around in the parking lot looking confused and scared. And there, standing by the security checkpoint like a whipped dog, was Ryan Walker. He looked like he'd aged 15 years in the last 2 hours. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his normally perfect hair disheveled. He was holding a visitor's hard hat in his hands like a shield. I got out of Scott's Lincoln and walked up to the security gate. Didn't open it. Just stood there waiting. Scott nudged Ryan hard in the ribs. "Do it." Ryan looked at me with pure hatred, but his fear was stronger. The kind of fear that comes from watching $45 million disappear in real time. "I'm sorry, Brian," he mumbled, barely audible over the noise of the emergency vehicles. "Can't hear you over the sound of your automation failing," I said, cupping my ear theatrically. "I'm sorry!" Ryan screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I was wrong! You were right! The automation isn't working. Please fix it!" I looked around at the crowd of workers, my guys, watching this whole scene unfold. Tony gave me a subtle thumbs up. Dan nodded approvingly. Chris Wilson was grinning ear to ear. "All right," I said, adjusting my work shirt collar. "Let's go save your company." The walk to the control room felt like a victory march. The plant was eerily quiet. You could actually hear conversations over the reduced machinery noise. Emergency lighting cast everything in that sickly yellow glow that meant we were running on backup power. In the control room, Ashley Martinez was practically in tears, frantically typing commands that the system kept rejecting. The moment she saw me, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Brian! The autosync system is locked in fault mode. I can't override it. The frequency drift is too severe." "I know exactly what's wrong," I said, sliding into my chair like I'd never left. "Someone flipped SW4 to automatic mode. Probably during routine maintenance. It took me exactly 12 minutes to restore full power, manual override on the synchronization system, phase adjustment to match the grid frequency, gradual restart of the smelting operations. The temperature readings climbed from 1,650 degrees back up to normal operating range of 1,800 degrees. When the last alarm cleared and the main display showed all systems green, the entire control room erupted in cheers. But the sweetest sound was Ryan Walker, standing in the doorway, quietly asking, "How much is this going to cost us?" I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. "Everything." 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my climate-controlled office, making 3 times my old salary, with a 5-year contract that guarantees Ryan Walker stays out of my department permanently. He's been reassigned to strategic planning, which means he has a basement office and no actual authority over anything important. The plant hums along perfectly, just like it has for 20 years. Because sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and sometimes the guy who actually knows what he's doing deserves to be in charge. I lean back in my chair, put my feet up on the console, and watch the voltage readings hold steady at exactly where they should be, just like me.